All right, I'm gonna tie one of my go-to jigs for um, cool water, fall and spring, or just muddy to really stained water in general. This is just one of my go-to jigs, period. But for stained water and when the water's changing from warm to cool and then when it's warming back up in the spring, I really like this color. It's a pink head. This is an 1/8 ounce, but I'm going to use a chartreuse body and tail with a red and blue flash. If you don't have a mold that pours these heads without the collar, or if you don't buy them that way, you can just cut the collar off with a pair of cutters. We'll just call them that. I already cut this one off, so you just kind of snip it right there below the ball, and then cut the collar in half, and it'll come right off. You want this in your vise pretty tight because we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on this when we wrap everything. We want our thread and our chenille to be really tight. So I just start with about 6 or 7 wraps back towards the head, and then go back across to kind of lock that thread in, and then I'll cut the little tag off. And then go ahead and wrap it all the way down to about where the point, to where it's directly above the point. That's about how far down we want everything to go. And you see how that jig head's moving as I'm wrapping it. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on it. This is 210 denier. You want at least that. I've broken this. If you get the lighter one, I think the 136D, you'll get, you know, that's pretty common. It's real thin, it breaks. You can use it, but you have to be a lot more careful with it. So we've got a good bed here that'll help to keep our chenille from slipping, and our hackle. So this is what I use for my tail material most of the time. I don't use a lot of hair. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I'll use this. This is a rooster saddle, neck hackle, anything like that'll work. I think I got this from Bass Pro, but you can get it online. For 1/8 ounce, I'll use about 3 to 4 pieces. Usually I'll just use like 2 tips and a V, sometimes 2 of each. Just depends on how big of a profile I want. But I think on this one I'm just going to use 3. So I'll cut the tip about like that, you know, a couple inches, 2.5, 3 inches. And then on these, you'll only get about a tip and a V out of each one. It depends on what brand you get. Some of them are a lot wider, and you can get 3 or 4 cuts out of them. These, you only, like I said, you only get about 2. So the way I do it, we're going to use all 4 of these. So I'll just take my V, and then I'll put both tips in the middle. I like the tips in the middle to where they stick out past that V. And then I'll put my other V on the back. So I've got a V on the outside and then 2 tips in the middle. And what I'll do is I'll hold it. I want it to only stick out past my hook shank, or past the bend of my hook, about maybe a 1/2 inch, no more. So I'll kind of look and see where I want it to sit, and then I'll hold it right where it comes up to the head there. And then I'll take my scissors and cut that off square. And then I'll just squeeze it on the end where I cut it and kind of look at how that spreads out, and then see how I want it to sit on my jig. I kind of like my feathers to kind of spread out, everything to be even. You don't want them kind of sticking all over the place. And so if you like the way it sits, holding it like that, I try to wrap it onto the shank of the hook the same way. So we'll just put it on there, kind of wrap it a little loose, and then kind of go back towards the head. And then just work your way back to the point. And you want to wrap this really tight. You don't, like I said, you don't want this stuff to slip on the shank of the hook. So once you get to where your thread is almost touching the tip of the hook, I'll stop, and then I'll go back about 3 or 4 wraps, because now we're going to put our flash on there, and I'll kind of check my feathers to see if they're sitting the way I want them to. And you can still kind of adjust them at this point. You can still move them. You want to do it now, because after this next step you won't be able to move them, so you can just kind of adjust them. And I forgot to mention too, I'm going to use whatever color chenille that I'm going to put on use for my body. I'm going to use that same color thread, because you're going to wrap it up here, and if if your jig head isn't the same color as your body, it just looks a little bit better. The thread blends in once you do your wraps, your knot. It's slipping my mind right now what that's called, but anyway, we're gonna put our flash on. So on an 1/8 ounce, I'll use about 4 strands. So I'm gonna use 2 pieces of blue and 2 pieces of red. You don't have to use this. I like it. So I'm gonna cut it about 2.5, 3 inches. Got 2 pieces of that, and then 2 pieces of blue. And then I just kind of bunch them up, make sure that they're all even here. So you're gonna have 8 strands in total, and I'm gonna put it up here to where they're just short of the end of the tail feathers, and I'm gonna put them on this side facing me, because as I wrap away from me, it's gonna try to pull them around. So I'm gonna wrap it kind of loose and then pull it tight, and then just give it about 3 or 4 wraps. Make sure that looks good, and then take these and pull them back over almost to the top, maybe over the little bit to the other side, because again, once you wrap it, it's going to go ahead and pull them around. And then just wrap back towards the head. This is an 1/8 ounce, so I'm going to start my chenille up here, because I kind of like a little bit of a tapered body. I don't like a really large profile body on my jigs, but I do like a little bit of a taper on my 1/8. If this was a 16th, I'd keep my thread down here, and I would start my chenille here and just wrap it straight up, and it would give it a smaller profile. But now this is where a lot of people argue about whether to use this stuff or not. I tied a lot of jigs without it, and I regretted it. I bought a lot of jigs before I started tying. People didn't use it. There's no comparison. They last way longer. I don't tie these for to sell. I don't tie them because I'm trying to get 1,000 out, to make money. I might spend, an hour tying 10 or 15 jigs because I want them to last. And in those 10 or 15 jigs, I may not tie again for 2 or 3 months. So it's worth it for me to spend a little bit of extra time. And if somebody wants to say I'm not tying my jigs right because I'm using this stuff, that's okay, because they last forever. They last until I lose them. I haven't worn one out yet before I lost it. So anyway, this is where I start this. This is Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. It's nail hardener. I got it at Walgreens. You can probably find it anywhere. But I put a pretty good amount here on the thread where I'm going to put my chenille. And And this is just medium fluorescent chartreuse chenille. I got this at Ozark Angler. So like I said, on an 1/8 ounce, I'm going to start up here at the front, behind the head, and I'm going to, same thing, just kind of loose and then wrap it around back about 1/8 of an inch. I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm going to start out about 1/8 of an inch behind the head. This actually broke, so we're going to start over. And then wrap it back towards the head. And then, so I'm going to start my wrap right here behind the head. And I'm going to go back about 2 or 3 wraps. And then I'm going to start wrapping my thread back towards the bend of the hook. And I'm just going to stop wherever I want my body to stop. And then I'm going to wrap my thread back this way and then come back around and wrap it again. And again, you want this stuff, you see how that jig's moving, you want this to be really tight. And I kind of focus on this quite a bit right here as I'm wrapping, because I want to bring that profile down a little bit and I want it to be nice and tight. I don't want it to move. You can already grab this right here and try to twist it. It's not moving. So now I'm going to take some more of this, and I want it kind of pulling at the bottom of that dropper applicator, whatever you want to call it, because I want a pretty good amount of this stuff on the body. It just makes sure that it doesn't come apart, doesn't move on you. And so when I wrap my chenille, I'm going to wrap it the opposite direction that I wrap my thread. So when I'm winding my thread on here, I'm always going, it would be clockwise, but I'm always wrapping away from me. So when I wrap my chenille, I'm going to wrap it towards me. And I'm just going to wrap it as consistently as possible without overlapping. With this medium chenille, it's about the right size that you don't have to wrap it on top of itself. And I want to bring it up to where it touches the head, and then I'm going to wrap it one more time. And now this is just my method that I've came up with. I've seen a lot of different finishes. Whip finish is what I was trying to think of earlier. So I'll take my thread and wrap it over the top of the chenille and then back down. And then I'm just going to take and wrap it, a few times to kind of lock that thread in, lock the chenille in. And what I like to do is when I do my whip finish, these are basically just going to be 1/2 inch knots. And so instead of clipping this chenille off right at the body of the jig, I'm going to leave a little bit sticking up there so that I can actually do my whip over the top of this instead of tying it in front of it. I want to tie my knot around this so that it's actually cinched down over the chenille instead of just cinched in front of it, because that chenille can come out from under it if you just tie the knot, if you just cut it off and then tie the knot behind where you cut it. Whereas if you tie the knot over it, you're actually tying this into the knot. So it kind of leaves a little bit there. As you do it more, you'll get good at cutting it, being able to trim it to where you won't see that big knot there. It just takes a little bit of practice and a good pair of scissors. Get a good sharp pair of scissors. The ones that come with that kit, this is that cheap kit from Bass Pro. The ones that come with it aren't that great. You want a pair, and this is the pair that came with it. But I'm about to invest in a better pair. so that you can really get that tip in there and cut it right where you want to without cutting into the body. So I use the regular whip tool, and the way that I tie my whip is I hook it just overhand with it like this, hook it on the thread, and then wrap the thread around this back part, come back around and make like an upside down 4, right? So you've got this little triangle here, and then I take that triangle, it would be my left side, around that chenille that's sticking up, and then go over the head. And I'll do that about 4 or 5 times. And then this is where I do it a little bit different. When I get ready to release that thread, I pull it over that chenille that's sticking up, so it's actually cinching down behind. And you see when I pull it, it actually pulls that chenille down, and I'll pull against it just to tighten that up. And I'm not going to say that that's the right or wrong way to do it, but I haven't had one come apart since I started doing it this way. It's a little bit of extra work. Again, I mean, if you just want to tie a quality jig for yourself, or if you're tying them for somebody else and you care about your work, not saying this is the best way or the only way, but it does work well and it lasts. So then I'll just take and cut that chenille as close to the body as I can, and I mean, you can't even see where it was cut. And then just cut the thread off, and I take one more drop of this, and again I want to apply a pretty good amount here, right where I cut the chenille and the thread, and I almost want it to drip off of the end of this so that it can absorb into where the knot is and pretty much all the way around the head, so this thing is not coming apart. And this stuff dries clear. You'll smell it for a day or two, so I don't know if it affects the fish, but I always tie them a day or two before I plan on using them, so that they can cure and the smell will kind of go away, but it will go away after a day or two. So I'll put a pretty good amount of that on there. Just kind of spread it around a little bit. And I always check them. This is just a habit, but I just kind of squeeze them and twist them. That thing is not going anywhere. And you can see that the flash is kind of sticking out past the feathers here. I always trim that back to where the flash is just a little bit shorter than the hackle. And there you go. I don't know how well you can see it, but that's one of my go-to jigs. Pretty easy to tie. You can do that with any color, just like I said, when you do your when you use your thread, just pick whatever color thread your chenille is, because it just matches. It blends right in. You can't see the thread. I've seen people use the same color thread as their jig head, and it just kind of bleeds off into the body, or they'll use a completely different color. And if you want to go for that kind of look, like if you just wanted to, you've got red and blue flash here. If you wanted to use a red or a blue thread, it would give you just a little bit different color pattern there. You would have a chartreuse body, maybe a blue thread wrapping here, and then your pink head, and that may make it stand out a little bit more. So that's just something that you can play with if you want to give it a little bit more pop. But that's basically how you do it, and that's a good solid jig. It'll last you until you lose it. Hope that helps.